Modular programming, or known as functions. Okay. So what you'll need to know is basically a few things. First of all, why do we need functions? So functions is basically to group certain task or certain execution. You want to keep it separate, which means let's assume in one program you have user information, then you need to select the medicine, you have to calculate, and then you have to print out. So all of this can be done in main function actually, but it is recommended to split or remove and group certain tasks into certain function. So assume if you are doing some calculations, you can just group all the calculations into a particular function. So if there's any changes, you can just actually refer or modify that particular function itself. All right. So those are about functions. Things you need to know. Currently, if you look in your code block, every single project that you create, there is one main. So that is a main function. So it's a function that executes everything. So any functions or modular programming that you do or perform, it has to be called from the main function. If you put it outside, it will not execute. So everything has to be the main function. But don't worry, I will show later when you do a function, what are the 3 requirements that you have to follow. Okay. So things that you have used before like printf and scanf is already a built-in functions. For today, you'll be learning to create your own or user-defined functions. All right. There are 3 things that you have to remember when you are doing modular programming or functions, which is function declaration, function definition, and function call or calling a function. So these 3 things is a must. So function declaration is also known as function prototype, and I'll show you in a while. And for each function declaration, there are also 3 things on it that is required. Okay, I'll move straight to the example. So these are something, the slides that you can read or refer to. So the slides are for your exploration and reference. Okay. So there's answers, there's question answers and things like that. Okay. So I'll stop from the slides first. And I'll move in straight into the implementation. Okay. So when we talk about function, okay, modular functions, modular programming or functions, there are 3 things just now, which is function declaration. So where do we do that? Okay, I'll show you straight here. Right above the integer main or before integer main, it will be your function declaration, or also known as prototype. Okay. So this is where you'll put all your function declaration and prototype. It's a must. Okay. You'll put it here before the integer main. Okay. Second is called function definition, which is basically your function. If you take a look at this is a function definition for main. But of course, we can't change this because this is what is required. It's compulsory to run. So this is known as function definition. So when you create your own function, you'll have your own function definition, which is you'll put it right after or outside this curly bracket of your main function or your integer main. Okay, so this will be your function body or function definition. Okay, so this is where you'll create your own function. Okay, so first is function declaration or function prototype. Second is function body or function definition, which will be your function. And third is your function call. So if we take a look at the slides, there's three things, right? So calling a function or function call is the third thing. It is required so that you can execute this function. So where do you put the function call? It's inside your main. So your function call or calling a function needs to be executed inside this integer main. If you don't have this, you will not execute. The compiler will compile this, but your functions become useless because you did not call or use the function. So these are the three things. First is function declaration. Second is function body or function definition. And third is function call. All right. So these are the three things. So how does this work? Okay. Let me show you guys. Okay. Now in default, if we run this, what do we get? We get hello world, right? So this is without modular programming, which means you execute everything inside main. So let's convert this to modular programming. So what we're going to do is we're going to print this from a function. So we don't want it on the main. So I'm going to declare first. Okay, when it comes to creating a function, a user-defined function, there are three things. One is the data type. It can be void, it can be integer, it can be char, float, double, and so on. So all the data type that you used to declare for the variables can be used for the function. But of course, we have something extra called void. What's void? Okay, I'll explain in a while. But for the moment, please take a close look on declaring function first, and then I'll explain. So first will be the data type. In my case, I'm putting void because I don't need anything, any return whatsoever. I'll show you guys in a while. So after the data type, then you type in your function name, a unique name. You know, like printf, this is a function defined by the C libraries. It's called printf. So when you call this, it performs whatever that you call inside this function. So now we want to do our own custom function. So let's call it display. Why am I calling display? Because I want to display this hello world. So first is the data type, void. Second is the function name, display. And third is this bracket where you put in your parameters. So what's parameters? I'll explain in a while as well. So don't worry about that. So for this moment, this is my function declaration, which requires three things. The data type or the return. I don't need anything to be written. I just want to call. Therefore, it's void. Second is my function name. And third is the parameters. Do I have anything that I want to send to this function, that I want this function to receive? At this moment, no. So it's empty. So this is function declaration. Okay. Next, we will do function body or function definition. The easiest way to do this is actually to copy your function declaration because it has to be same. Put it outside of this. Okay. And remove this semicolon because function declaration is to declare that this function exists. Function body or definition is the thing that you are going to create your function. So put this like this and open close curly bracket. So if you notice, this is what I meant. It is a user defined function because main is its own function and the style is the same. So on function definition or function body, just copy this, paste here, remove the semicolon, and create the curly bracket. So everything you do inside here will be custom to this function. All right. So what I'm going to do, since I told you guys that for this example, rather than displaying LOL in the main, I want to do a function that displays LOL. So I'm going to cut or remove this printf, and I'm going to put it inside my own function called display, and it's going to display LOL. Okay. So since I remove this, if I execute this, I'll get nothing. Why? Because the function exists, but I did not call for my function. Therefore, there's no output. That is where we will come into the function call. So what's the difference? Just copy this again, put it here. But there's one thing you have to change. Function call is something that you call the function from inside the main. And since you already declare this as void, and the function body already declared this, so you don't have to do the data type declaration in the function call. So function call is actually just typing in the exact name of the function, and then by calling this bracket and with a semicolon. So when you do this function call, it will execute everything from your own custom function. Okay. But there's one thing that students tend to make mistakes is the spelling. Please remember, if you declare this as display, it has to be exactly the same. If you go and put capital letter here, it will be an error because it's not recognized. So if you use a big D or any custom alphabets, you have to make sure it's case sensitive. So just copy paste exactly from the declaration. All right. So now what we have done here is we have created our own function with the three requirement: function declaration, function body or function definition, and the function call. So now it's completed. And when we execute this, you'll be able to see the LOL. So there you go. That is function, user-defined function. And it's different from the standard LOL display from the main. We have decided to make a function. So if you can remember this, the three steps, the three requirements, the declaration, the definition, and the function call, then you'll be able to create your own functions. Okay. And then when it comes to the declaration or the body or the function definition, there are another three requirement here, which is the return type, the function name, and then the parameters. All right. Okay. If you look in your slide, of course, there are a few other things in terms of global function and local function. So what's global, what's local? You can read from the slide. But when you do in here, the difference happens is that this is now considered as global function, which means this display function that I create, which is outside. As long it is outside the main function, it is known as global. Okay. So anyone, any functions, any codes can call this display function. Okay. When we talk about local function, what happens is that when we move this, okay, inside the main, when we move it inside the main, okay, this will become local function, which means this function is only executable inside main. So let's say if you have another function, a function called custom function, and if you try to call this display function, it will not run because it's not recognized. This function only exists inside the main function. So coming back to for your course for this semester for programming technique, you will rarely use local function. So most of your questions and your learning will be global function. But of course, you need to know about local function as well. Okay, so that's the difference between global and local. So let's go back to the initial one. Okay, so now we have seen how to do the function. Okay, now I'll explain the three different things. This one is you create or you perform the output from this display function. Okay, so there's two things here. One is this, which it can be integer, it can be char, it can be float, it can be double. Okay, so what does this mean? Okay, let me show you guys. Void is meant for if you don't have anything that you want to return, which means, what do I mean by return? You don't expect this function to return or give back something, which means when you call, if you notice there is no assignment symbol, right? I don't assign anything. It means I don't get anything from this function. It just executes and it terminates. So if you want something back, if you want something written from this function, then you have to change this from void to the data type that you want the function to return to you. So if you don't want anything, no returns, just stick with void. So in our case, okay, what I want to do is I want this function to return to me a value, an integer value that I would like to printf after the functions. Why? Because I want to prove that this function has already executed. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want this function to give me back something, right? So in this function, what I want it to give back? Okay, integer, say a number. Okay, so I declare a number and I initialize the number to 5, value 5. So I want this function to give me back this value. Okay, so since I want it to give me back or return an integer type, therefore my function data type return should also be integer. So when I want to convert this to integer, what I have to do? Change this to integer. And then this will also change. Remember I told earlier that if you, once you've completed the declaration of prototype, copy paste here. So it will be exactly the same. So now if I put in integer, yes, integer. So the moment I change to integer or any other data type besides void, please remember, besides void, there is one keyword called return that you have to type, or else this will be an error. So we are going to return the variable number. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if you guys notice or not. Do you realize that in your main function, every time there's a return? So this is exactly the reason. When you declare this as integer main, you have to return a value. In our case, we return 0, which is it terminates successfully. That's what is meant by 0. So if you decided not to have return, you can of course do void main, and you don't need this return. And if you execute, there wouldn't be any issues. Okay. But when you create your project default, it will be integer main. So any data type that comes besides void requires this keyword return. So please do not forget this, yeah? So coming back to our example here. So what I've done is initially it was void display. I don't need anything, but now I decided that I want something back, which is I want a type integer back. So I put in integer here. I change the function definition to integer and I add the keyword return. So when I do this, when I call this display function, it will return me a variable with this value as a type integer when I call it. So since I already declare this as an integer type, this function will return a value. Therefore, if I run this, it will be an error. So I need to save it to a variable, which I need to collect whatever this function is returning. So I'm going to declare a variable called value. So when I call this function, it goes here, it prints this, and it lets me know that there is a value 5 coming back. So to make it simple, okay, what does this return mean? It's actually equal to you typing this actually. You're assigning 5 to value, it's the same. But rather than we defining it here, we are letting the function to tell us what value we need. So that is why we are writing it like this, okay? So it will return this value here to this variable. And of course, we have to declare. So variable declaration. Okay. So just now is with void. Now is when you have your own data type that your function can return. So let's run this. What you will see is just LOL. But where's the number 5, right? Because we haven't do any printf. So in order to view that, the number 5 is coming from the function display. And once we have called this, we want to know it's successful. This line has been successful. So let's printf the value that the function has written to us. So it is going to be an integer value. Okay. And it is from this variable. Okay. Let's just put a new line. So there you go. LOL. So what happens is that your program will execute from main. It will come to line 10. It will declare this variable. So there's one variable called value of a type integer, but there's no information at all. It's empty. And then it will go to line 13 and it will execute this. It will call the display function. So when it calls here, what happens is that it will move straight to line number 20 and it will execute line number 20, which it will go in. There'll be a variable declared here with the value 5. Then it will move to line 24. It will print a hello world. So that is why you'll be able to see on your screen this hello world. Okay. And then once line 24 completed, it will go to line 26, which is it returns a variable number which has a value 5. So once come to line 27, display function closes, it comes back to line number 13. And since there is a return, so this entire gray out that I highlight here will give you the value number 5 and it will be assigned to the variable value in line number 13. So now this variable has a value. So when you go to line 14, it will print out the value of this variable number. Okay, so that's 5. That's why you can see 5 here. And then it will go to line 15, nothing there. Line 16, return 0, program terminated successfully, which is return 0. And then your program ends. Okay. So now I've shown you guys from standard function to function that has written. Use function when you want to group certain programs or certain codes into a group, which means, okay, one example, you guys have learned problem solving, and you know in problem solving there is a separation of group where you group input and then you do process and then you do output, right? So assume you want to make all your inputs that you get from your user into a function. So you want to group that. You know that every inputs that you're taking from a user, you group it into a function. And then all the process, all your calculation, all your custom equation, things like that, that you want to process, you put it into a function called process. And everything you want to display on your screen, you put in a function called output or display. So that will group inputs into a function, process into a function, and output into a function. So how to know? Okay, it depends on the program, the case study, and also your idea. Basically, what we tend to do, or how we decide when we want to do function, is by looking at the case study or the problem. Things we usually do is we see what can be grouped together. If you are doing, like previously, you guys used to do the BMI calculator, right? Okay. Just to calculate the BMI, you require the height times the weight and then divide by the weight, that formula, right? So all the formulas you can put into a function. So why do we put into the functions? Is so that you don't make the codes messy. But of course, in our case, this is not messy because, of course, it's just 27 lines. But when you are doing a huge program or application, the lines of codes is going to be like thousands or more. So creating a function allows you to group them into a group so that if you want to do any changes, you can just focus on that function. So in my case, say if I want to change all my printing, in this case, I'll just go to the function display. I don't have to worry about other codes. I'll just go here to modify. Okay, that is for one reason. Okay, when do we use it and how do we use it? Okay. Second is because we want to reuse the code. What do I mean by reuse? It's a code that you're going to use on your other application. So example, if you create a function called BMI calculator, that means your entire functions, let's assume it's BMI calculator, and you have float, height, weight, okay, and then you perform your calculation. Say BMI equals to, what's the formula for the BMI? Height square, right? Divide by weight. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if it's wrong. Okay, and then I'm going to return BMI. So say if I do this, what happens is that, of course, we have to change this. And we are calling this, okay. So of course, when you run this, there's no value because there's no information here. So assume in meter 1.62 and your weight in kilogram 65. Oh, oops, sorry, wrong. Return float. I want a 0. So you should get your BMI value. All right. I'm not sure the formula is correct or wrong. Okay, so here's an example. So if you're doing a BMI calculator and it requires this 3 variable and it will do the calculation. So why we do function? Assume your program only does BMI calculation. But say your friend has another project which have codes that does like an health application that maybe calculates food calories count, things like that. And then your friend or another programmer decided that, okay, I would like to also add the BMI calculator in my application. So what they can do, rather than recreating all this, they just have to get this function and you can share it in that application. It has to do just this function call, this declaration, and you can reuse this function, or even if in your own application, because you know that in C programming you can have multiple source code. Yep. So things like that. So yeah, as Irina asked us another question, when do we use function is that when you think you want to reuse the code or a chunk of codes that you can share a certain function, a certain application, then yes, put it in a function. So it allows reusability, and it also allows easy tracking and modification of the functions. All right. So I hope I did answer your question in terms of yeah, when do we use it and how can we use it. Before that, remember earlier I showed void and I showed integer, right? So here's an example for float. If you are doing for BMI calculator, obviously you are playing with decimal places, therefore you require float. So you have to do is change declaration to float, function definition to float, and your return type will automatically support float. All right. Wait, let me just try to change this to something easier. Output. Oh, of course. There's another shortcut. If you don't want to do this, you can actually just take this and put it here. Yep. This is another shortcut. So your printf, it will call this function. Whatever written will be displayed here. And sorry, point to f. So float type. Okay. Saying about this written. Tadi Encik Muhammad tanya kan, okay, how do we know what we're going to type here? It's not the name of the function, It's basically whatever variable that has the information that you want to return of a type float. In our case, because our calculation that we are doing here is actually going to be saved into this variable called BMI. So there is a value here. So we want to return that. Therefore, we will just copy paste this variable that we want to return. But say if you don't have anything at all, you can just return a value directly from here, assuming it's 55.67. You just type in here. Of course, there's nothing, it's empty. This value is a float type, so it will be returned to here. Okay, let me show. So if you take a closer look here. So when we talk about return, tadi Encik Muhammad tanya lah, okay, what variable we can put here? We can put the values, we can put the variable, we can even put some other statements here. But for your case, just stick with the variables because we'll be using that more. If you're going to do like return 55.67, actually we don't need a function. So function is required when you want to do certain calculation, things like that. Okay. So it would be easier by actually putting in the variables. So in our case, we already performed the calculation and we know the final output or final result is saved in the variable BMI. So we're just going to return this variable. So this value will come back here. Okay. So in our case, when we times this square divided by this, we get 0.04. Okay. So this is for the second one. First, remember I showed on void. Then I showed on integer. So integer, float, double, char, the same. If you change this to char, okay, if you change this to char, then of course your return type will be something on char. So of course you can't use this. So you might have like char name. Okay, and then you return name. But of course, in C, there is a problem related to string because you need to use string copy. So strcpy, that one I'll show you on another session. Okay, so for function declaration, basically this left-hand side, there's three things, right? I told you the data type, the function name, and the function parameter. Data type is what do you want the return type to be. If you're going to return a string or a char, then you have to declare this as char. In our case, when we are doing BMI, we are going to return a type float. Therefore, automatically you have to put float. So if you're going to return as double, then put in double. But if you are not going to return anything, like what I did just now, printf for hello, then just change this to void. So if you put this as void, then you don't need any return. Okay, so this is the basic for function. So we have looked at first on data type. Okay, now let's take a look in terms of parameters, which I've mentioned here earlier. In terms of parameters, okay, so we're going to remain it at void at this moment. Okay, and we are going to do about parameters. So what are we going to do? Let's go back to the basic of LOL so that you guys can see the difference. Okay, all right. So void display, and what are we going to do is we are going to send some variables to this function. So this is called passing by value. There's another one, passing by reference. There's two different way of passing parameters. I will show in a while. Hopefully we still have time. So I'm just going to show you the passing by value first. So we don't need any return from this function. We just want to call it. It's called display function. But what we want to send is we want to send the hello world just now. So what I'm going to do is, of course, there's a text that I want to receive. Okay. So I'm going to add what text I'm going to receive. It's a char and it's a string. Okay. So in here, I'm going to declare char. Do I need to use the same one? Not really, actually. Let's do step by step. Copy paste here, remove the semicolon. So now your function will be able to accept a variable called text. Okay. And what are we going to do is we're going to print the information that we receive from this function. Okay. So new line, it's going to be a string. And it's going to be this variable text. Okay, so I'm going to print out whatever being sent to this function. So let's declare a variable here. My variable, a string type that can support 20 characters. Okay, and I'm going to assign immediately in it hello world. I'm initializing the variable. So now we have a variable in main that stores this word hello world. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to send this text to this function so that it can print out. So how do we do? Same as earlier, function call. Sorry, this should be here. This should be your function call. So previously we just do this, right? Which is void. Yep, same. But right now this function accepts a parameter, so you need to send something here. So in our case, we are going to send this variable. So we will send this variable through this function call, and this variable will be received in this function, and then it will display. So let's build, no errors, no warning. Let's run, and you'll be able to see the hello world. Oh, supposed to be this. So there you go. So the difference from earlier is you call your function and it performs the print immediately in the function, and you don't have to send anything. So this example is that when you have some information or some values or some text or things that you would like to send or pass to the function, then this is how you declare. Of course, what type of parameter that you want to pass, and then put it in your function call, and then in your function it will receive whatever that's being passed or transferred from your main. In our case it's hello world, so it will go here, and since you're calling in display, this variable will come here, will be saved into this text, and it will be displayed here. So this is called passing by value. Okay, passing by reference is basically you are going to send a pointer. Remember last week we learned pointer? So you're going to send a pointer. All right. I think I can show later on in the lab session for that. So this is for parameter passing. So from your function, and say if you want to send more than one information or variable, you can do so. Assume besides sending hello world, I would like to also send some values like the year 2021. Okay, how do I do that? I'm sending two. So we will go back to the function declaration. First parameter that we would like to accept is a string. Okay, and second parameter is an integer type, which is here. Okay, so copy that again, put it here, and right after displaying hello world, let's say if I decided to, after hello world, welcome to year, and I'm going to display another information. Okay, so I declare this allows you to send two parameters, and you have to remember when you do this, you can't put year first and then this second. You have to follow the sequence. If you do this, this will be an error. Why? Because 2021 in first as integer will be falling into the text of char type. So always remember, you have to follow the sequence. So this display function accepts a char variable followed by integer. So first will be char, second will be integer. So I'm sending these two information to this function. So when I execute, I'll be able to see this. Okay. So that's about function, and I've showed you the three steps: function declaration, function call, and function body or function definition. So usually we will do the function declaration first, followed by function definition, and then function call. But if you think that you are going to keep changing, like what I did right now, from char, I added integer. So if I'm going to keep changing my parameters, then what you can do is basically you can start with your function definition first. Okay, design exactly what you need. Say maybe another thing called float price. Okay, design it first here. So once you have done your function definition, okay, which is outside of the main curly bracket, always remember this. So once you have done this, okay, you know, okay, I'm no longer going to change anything. That's all. So then after you do the number one function definition, you copy this, you move into your number 2, which you do your function declaration, paste it here and add the semicolon. And then third, you decide your function call, which you're going to call with char type string. Second is an integer, and third is a float. So say 39.99. Okay, so these are the 3 steps. It depends on your preference. Some students prefer to do the declaration first, followed by function call second, and then only they design the function definition third. Some might go function declaration 1, function definition 2, and function call 3. Or some might go like this, 1, 2, and 3. So it depends on you actually. For me, sometimes if I know that I'm going to build a program on the go, which means I'm not sure what's the final changes, there might be things changing in between, I will do this first. So once I finalize all of it, then I'll just copy this, I'll put it up, and I'll declare as a prototype, and then only I will decide in my code where do I want to execute this function. Then only I decide this. Okay, so this is how function works. You have the 3 things you have to remember: the definition, the declaration or prototype, and the call. And besides these 3, there are 3 criteria on your function. The data type, if you don't need any return, use void. If you have something to return, or you want to use the keyword return, then you have to change this to what type of data that you want to return. If you're going to return float, then change this to float. Okay, and second will be your function name. This shouldn't be a problem. You can customize it. You can even name it, say, output, but make sure to reuse the same one. So this is your own custom name. And then parameters. If you want to send some information to the function for processing, then you put these parameters. But if you think your function is not going to receive anything, there's nothing you want to send, then keep this empty, which means you're not sending anything. You're just calling, then keep this empty. But of course, here you have to have your own variables then. All right. So that's all for modular programming for this week.